Hi, people. One thing I've always looked at with this channel is to try and make it practical in some way. That's usually in the form of talking about subjects, stories, issues which I think are relevant that need to be discussed. So I've always looked at it that way. Um, and I think this is just as apt as anything. I want to talk about mental health and the subject of depression. Now, in the UK, we often hear that this is difficult for young men to talk about. Um, for me, I've never found it that much of a struggle to talk about. Honestly, I don't personally feel so much the stigma that we sometimes hear about. Um, but I do understand why some people who go through it feel that. I think particularly for young men who might be in the sort of circuit where they're bit laddish, they drink a lot, and it's all about pulling girls and I don't know, perhaps talking about sports or it could be anything like that. I understand in that environment, it's not really easy to sort of sit down in a pub and say, "Oh, by the way, I'm depressed." So I do understand that. I do understand where that comes from. That sort of reluctance to talk. Um, and it may be, people feel that they are going to be seen as being dramatic, or they might think, well, it won't help me, something like that. I came across a BBC video the other day of a young guy in Leeds. Rather, it was Leeds Central train station, and he was holding a sign saying, "I sometimes have depression, and it's okay to talk." Not verbatim, but that was the sign. Ben Ogden, young guy was called. And he and his friend had set up this idea to sort of, it was a simple gesture, but he was getting a very positive response. Now, thing is, we often hear about depression in men. Of course, it affects women as well. Women can suffer postnatal depression, and women can suffer depression for the same reason as men do, perhaps financial concerns, relationship concerns. But I think as a man, I would say in terms of how this is approached in society, and I'll talk more about myself in a second, but in terms of how this is approached in society, I think things have improved. There are some public figures, yes, Harry and Meghan, despite the legitimate criticism of them, I do think they've at least made mental health an issue, along with other royals. Tyson Fury, the boxer, fair play to him. There's not many people in that sport who talk openly about mental health, so fair play to him. Um, I actually think when it comes to combat sports, mental health is a factor that is often overlooked, or sports in general. Because it's a competitive environment, especially in a sport like boxing, which is one on one, it's very intense. And there's a lot of effort put into, the physical side of training, perhaps some on the psychological side. I imagine, if a fighter's going into an arena and it's like a home crowd for his opponent, and therefore it's a hostile crowd towards him. I'd imagine at that level there would be some preparation involved, but I don't know how much can ever be effective. But there's a whole lot of factors. I mean, I would imagine in the sport of boxing, for example, if a fighter is having problems outside the ring, I mean, he might be doing very well in the ring, he might be winning fights, but if he is doing badly outside the ring, maybe if he's having relationship problems or um, probably financial problems less so, because at professional level you get quite good money. But if there's problems going on outside the ring, that's inevitably going to affect his mentality inside. There was a famous incident, actually, just sticking briefly on the issue of boxing, um, with Oliver Mccall. And he basically had a meltdown in the ring. It was one of his fights with Lennox Lewis. I think it was the second fight. I can't recall, but we're talking late 1990s. At the time, everyone was, it was actually pretty abhorrent looking back, saying things like McCall had just lost his nerve. His own trainer gave him this awful look, and it was, the guy was clearly having trouble. Oliver Mccall, fine fighter, nothing, he was no mediocre fighter. He was a pretty good fighter. I briefly held the World Heavyweight Championship. So, that's an example of how that can affect someone at that sort of level and in that environment. I mean, if you say the footage, it's sad to watch, but at the time, people were pretty merciless. They just thought, "Oh, he's lost his nerve," or so there's a real machismo in the sport of boxing, and I think that will always be there. Boxing will always be tough. Boxing will always have that thing. Um, but that's a good case study, I think. Today, I would like to think that there is more understanding, or at least there's more support given to fighters. Um, Particularly in that sport. Um, Now, for myself, I I wouldn't say I'm very depressed at the moment. In fact, I've just had good news, and this is a good example of the sort of contradiction that comes with depression. Today, my certificate has arrived. I may as well show you. Nothing top secret here. For my journalism, I took a course in freelance journalism with the British College of Journalism. I'd recommend it. They were, it was very comprehensive, good staff. They get back to you. Anyway, this is a diploma. It's just arrived today. Now that's good news. That's a good thing. It's an achievement, and I am happy about it. But there's other things going on in my life right now, which means that the genuine little perk that I feel from that, it's an achievement. Perhaps it's a little bit overshadowed by the other things. Um, but that's the thing with depression. I mean, this is good. This is a good thing, whatever angle I look at it. And I will use it. But with depression, if there is something in your life, and usually the thing about depression, I would say, is it's usually a lot of factors that lead to the sort of phase of depression. But I would say probably in most cases, certainly in my case, it's usually one big factor that sort of triggers the others. It sort of overshadows everything else. Now, it might be that people are having multiple problems at one time. When I had one of my bouts of depression, it would have been, I guess, late 2015. Just a lot of things were going wrong in my life at the same time. My bicycle was stolen. Our beloved family dog died. Um, I'd broken up with my girlfriend at that time. Just it wasn't so much that we broke up; she had to leave, but things just I was struggling to find much to be excited about, much to feel good about. Now I'm not quite in the same position now, but I've had two big blows this year. The first one I've said a few times, I didn't get into the Royal Navy Reserves, and that was because of clinical depression. They looked at that on my medical record, and Capita, the third party that's involved in assessing these things, a terrible company in my opinion. They failed me. Now, I say they're a terrible company not because they failed me, but because they strung it out. They could have just rejected me in the first place. And this is a reputation Capita has. The communication is absolutely terrible. It's very hard to get through to them. It's just a very bad company. It's not just medical assessments they do all sorts of things. But my experience of them is not good. Anyway, that was a big blow because I involved about 5 months of my life to that, which in a lifetime might not seem like much, but 5 months is 5 months. I was having training sessions online. It was still during the lockdown, so it was via Zoom. I even went into the local unit at one point, which obviously I'm not going to go into details, on a video. But the point is, I was really getting into the frame of mind that I'm going to be a sailor. I'm going to serve my country, and for that to suddenly change, it was an appeal process, but it was very unlikely that anything would have changed. And I thought I just didn't want the stress of having to go through that if the final outcome was going to be the same anyway. Um, my armed forces recruitment officer suggested that it would be the same outcome. So it seems that the armed forces they take a blanket approach to mental health, which I do understand. If if you're handling lethal weapons, if you're in a closed unit, potentially in a battlefield. Um, I understand totally why they're a bit iffy about that. I totally get that, but I just don't think Capita should string people out like that. I think they should have just said in the first place. I showed them a medical record. I answered all the questions honestly. It should have just said, "Well, thank you for your interest, but we have to tell you it's impossible if you've had this history," rather than stringing me out for 5 months. That's the first thing. Now, I accept it's never going to happen. I tried. I done nothing wrong, but it was hard. It was hard. Um, because there's a certain, I don't want to say romantic notion, but it's not a conventional job, is it? It's something that's, I would have been probably sailing around the world. There would have been things that came with that now I won't experience. It's hard. The second thing, I'm going to be a little bit more cagey about the details because it's more recent and I just want to be respectful to the other person. I had an online relationship and um, I never met the lady involved, but I got very, very close to her and we made plans. We were going to go to New York City next year. She uses YouTube. She might well come across this, and that's why I don't want to. I don't want to name her. I don't want to go into too many details out of respect for her privacy. But she just took a different view on how things were going, and it hurt very badly. It hurt badly, and I'm still not entirely over that. I accept that it probably won't change, and it's a case of that's my big distraction at the moment. I'm still connected with her, and I wonder is that wise? Maybe I shouldn't be, but I don't want any animosity with her, and she doesn't with me. But this is something that, for me, some people have this ability, like, well, I tried it, it didn't work out, then they're over it in a few days. Not me. Relationships is something I take very seriously. So, if I care about a woman and that it doesn't work out, it is quite a challenge for me. Um, but that's probably the main source of my, am I in a state of depression? I don't know. I've certainly been worse, definitely been worse, but, it's a factor. It's a factor that, my mental health would be better right now were I still talking to her as we were before, if things were the same. But she felt that things weren't going in the right direction. That we weren't compatible. Which is I see it differently, but that's obviously have to respect what she wants. And it's hard, very hard. One thing I would say to anyone who's thinking about online dating, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Because there's still, I actually signed up to eHarmony. It's a 1 year subscription. And I'd always been cynical about online dating. I always said, nah, you pay money, what do you get out of it? There's always a trust factor. I would say eHarmony is a good one because it's a serious one. It's not just about you know, oh, let's look at these sexy profiles, and it's just very vacuous and shallow. I think eHarmony is a good one. If you pay for the premium service, you can send messages, receive messages, unlimited browsing. It's a good service. I haven't had any major problems so far. Only one thing I don't like about it, I have this Freudian thing about masculinity and femininity, and I really don't know why they reach the conclusions they do with me. I'm, I mean, I'm fairly alpha male, so sometimes sometimes the logic and compatibility doesn't make a great deal of sense. But anyway, I'm just putting this out there because it helps me to vocalize things. And if you're watching this and you're depressed, your issues may be similar to mine. It may be connected to relationship. issues that may be connected to something to do with success. But this is an example of the contradiction. I've got good news, but that's tempered by this this feeling that something is gone in my life, and I probably won't get it back. I don't know, but um, if she was still in my life, things would be a lot better, and I'd be a lot happier. But that's just the way it is. It's one of the hard realities of this life that things come. Life is not smooth. You could be happy and things could be going well, and suddenly something just derails it, and it's very hard. It's one of the hardest things in life, I think. Um, but human beings were incredibly tenacious, and I think that I've been through so much, and I'm still here. Think of that Elton John song, "I'm Still Standing." Well, it's true. I'm actually sitting down right now, but yeah, it's true. I think I don't have any magic wand as to how to deal with depression, but I think the things that do help is keeping busy. Because if there's a particular focus of your depression, then if you're not busy, you're going to have more time to think about that thing. If you can increase your social circle, sometimes that's good because it creates more of a vacuum to just focus on other people. And if you're not able to do that, that's okay. Focus on things that you enjoy doing. And I know that sometimes the enjoyment factor is taken away, but at least it's a focus. Um, Treat each day like a new day. So it is each day is a new day. That's an optimistic way to look at things. Be grateful for things. I mean, there's a lot of good things in my life. I've got a roof over my head. Um, my financial position's better than it was before. I've just graduated. Um, I have caring, loving parents. There's a lot of things that I am grateful for. And I think that that's another thing to look at. It sounds a little bit preachy, but it's not about, it's not about that. It's just about a way to focus on what's good in our own lives. And finally, time. I don't think time necessarily, it doesn't change things. Does it heal? I guess on some level, for me, it does. I mean, it would depend on the extent. I think if, God forbid, something bad was to happen to a loved one, I don't think time would heal. You know, People who've survived terrorist attacks say they look at they say time doesn't heal, but it does something. It does something. I think people adapt to time rather than time heals. It does something positive. I would say. Okay, I'll round this up. If you and I'll put a link under the video because this is very important. If you live in the UK and you're going through depression, uh, consider calling the Samaritans. This is a free service. That's a very important point. It's free, free call. And the number is, let me just double check this. I've used them often, and they're wonderful people. They listen. They won't give advice. So if you're looking for specific advice, they're probably not the best people. But simply talking about a problem is sometimes very productive. 116 123. 116 123. I'll show you there on my phone. 116 123. If you live in the UK, consider giving them a call. What will happen is there might be a bit of a queue because a lot of people use them, but a volunteer will answer. They're wonderful people, and just don't be nervous. Just go into it, talk about your problem, say whatever you want to say. They're trained to listen, and they won't be able to give advice. If you need advice specifically about a problem, maybe citizens' advice is better. But Samaritans, the point is they listen to you in a non-judgmental way. It could be anything, you could be feeling guilty about something. It could be anything. But I've always found it very helpful. And another thing about the Samaritans, you don't need to be really miserable to call them. You don't need to be suicidal or really at rock bottom. You might just feel that talking would help you. Um, I might call them this evening. You know, I'm not miserable. I could be better, but I'm not miserable. I think it just helps. So anyway, okay, 20 minutes. I know this has been a bit longer, but I just wanted to vocalize how I was feeling. And one last thing about depression, people sometimes, if you have a friend or a relative who has depression, it's important not to sort of treat them like they're super fragile, because it doesn't mean that they're about to cut their wrists. It doesn't mean that that's the situation. They might be a vulnerable person, but more likely they just need to talk. That's all it is. Um, so sometimes when I've brought up my depression, people they get worried and concerned, and I really appreciate it because it shows they're decent people. But it's not always a case of anything to be worried about necessarily. It's just that I feel like vocalizing it. I feel, I probably should have said this at the start of the video, but if someone asks how I am, some people they like to dismiss things. I'm fine, I'm fine. I don't. I tell them. I've just never felt that stigma. If they want to judge me, that's their problem. But if someone asks how are you, Nathan, and I'm not well, I'm not necessarily going to brush out all the details if I don't know them that well. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say, oh, everything's fine. You know, if I'm unhappy, if I'm depressed, I will say so, because I think putting on this pretense of being okay, it really, really doesn't help. It might it might avoid an awkward conversation, and I guess that's why people do it. But you know, if you close it up long term, I can understand maybe not wanting to talk to a stranger, but if you find that you're even doing that with friends, that's a serious problem, and you need to consider calling the Samaritans. 116 123. Thanks for listening.